Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Mock It Like It's Hot, presented to you by Club Fantasy FFL. I am Evan, the great L. Bushman. I am back. I haven't been here in a couple weeks because of, being sick and busy schedules. So we are back for another mock draft. And, of course, my co-host with the most, Ryan Weisse. Ryan, how's it going, man? You've been sick, too. You had the Rona?
I had the Rona.
You had the Rona?
Tested too early the first time and thought I didn't have it and then ended up having it. It was the worst sore throat I have ever experienced in my entire life. Didn't even have a voice, which is why we canceled the show a couple of weeks ago. So it's been an adventure, but we're back at it. We're here knocking out rookie drafts. I'm pretty excited. So.
That's right. We are back to educate and facilitate your best mock drafts going into this season for fantasy football. And joining us today is Brandon Angelo from AngeloAnalysis.com. Brandon, how's it going, man? Good morning to you. Happy Monday.
Man, happy Monday. It's draft week. So I'm doing well. I'm excited. I'm here in Chicago, so I'm a big Bears fan. Hoping we don't screw it up too bad. Obviously, no day one pick. But hoping Skye Moore falls in day two. I don't think that's gonna happen, but I'd be happy with with George Pickens or in the third, like a David Bell. But I'm getting excited, man. It's only a few days away.
That's right. We are only a few days away from the NFL draft. It's a busy week for everybody, especially on the Twitterverse. We've got rumors circling around, all kinds of major announcements coming. If somebody's going to be trading out spots or if trades are happening for players, of course, Adam Schefter better get his Twitter right because we'll all be torching him profusely if he starts.
He's had a rough month on
Dude. Somebody, you would think he has a handler that goes, maybe you shouldn't tweet out this before pushing tweet, but apparently not. So he doesn't care.
Clearly not.
So. All right, so let's do this mock draft. It's a 12-man rookie draft, full PPR. Ryan, tell us a little bit about this before we get started.
So, yeah, we wanted to focus on rookie drafts for this week because the goal is we're going to then knock out 2 rookie drafts just after the draft to see how things change with landing spots. We went 12-man. We went 1 QB this time, and I did that for a couple of reasons. I understand Superflex is all the rage, especially in Dynasty right now. But if you are not following Angelo on Twitter, follow Angelo on Twitter. And it's not that he doesn't do great quarterback work, but this guy smashes with quarterbacks and wide receivers. And so I want to get those quarterbacks maybe out of these first couple rounds and let Angelo really shine with the quarterback or running backs and wide receivers. And there's not a lot of tight ends to talk about, but I'm sure a couple of them will get taken. So that was my thought process with going 1 QB so we could focus on running backs. We have it set up like your standard Dynasty draft. So it is a linear draft, not a snake draft. Faith is going to be getting us started. I'm going to go ahead and click start draft. Hopefully she is in the room this time. I believe she is. Last week, this show went about a half an hour. Basically, we'll be here as long as Angelo wants to talk with us. I know you have a hard out at about 10 after, but I can't imagine it even gets close to that period of time. So I have clicked start draft. We are waiting on Faith.
We are on our way. Class is in session. And so let's start off with a couple questions to you guys. And Brandon, I'll go to you first. The draft is coming up. This is for rookies. Now, what would be your thought process and evaluation going into a rookie draft like this? Because, these players haven't been in the NFL yet. They're going to the combine. They're going to the draft. What is your thought process about drafting your players in the first couple of rounds?
Oh, man, it comes down to, my team composition, really. So, who do I have in my roster right now? Or is this the first draft that we're having, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, that's a big deal when I look at some of these guys and understanding they don't have landing spots yet. Obviously, we're pre-NFL draft, but for me, I use the Ascension grading system on my website to help me draft. That's kind of my big guide, and helping with that type of work. So all right, I'm up. So
yeah, we'll let you pick.
Yeah. Let me make my pick. Let's see.
And I'll bounce that question to you, Ryan. When going into a draft like this, and we talked about this before the show, where this draft isn't as sexy as it's been in the past couple of years. So, the analysis and watching these rookies go into the draft class, and I think Brandon hit the nail on the head. It's like you really have to go by the needs, especially if you're going into a rookie draft like this. So if you're maybe going into it just kind of clean, this is your first rookie draft at all, what would be your ultimate strategy going into a rookie draft like this?
Yeah, if it's your first rookie draft at all, especially I'm assuming then you weren't in the league the previous year, or maybe this is the second year. Team needs is always a big thing for me. I play Dynasty to win. There are people, and I'm not saying eventually we don't all play Dynasty to win, but there are people who productive struggle for the first couple of years, and they're going to accumulate draft picks. And you, in your first round of your rookie draft, could have one guy making 5 of these first 12 picks. choice if that's how they decided to build their team. I'm rarely in the first round. I'm a guy who pushes these rookie picks out for proven talent because it's always about winning like right away for me. But if it's your first rookie draft ever, best player available, and then you kind of want to lean wide receivers unless you're definitely in a win now mode. And as you can see with this draft already, Breece Hall went the 101 and then 5 straight wide receivers. Wide receivers tend to have a little bit more longevity in the NFL. And when you're building a dynasty team, you're hoping these guys are, 1, going to help you win a championship for years to come, or 2, they're going to hold a plenty of value so you can trade them away for more rookie picks later on. So for me, it's a heavy focus on best player available, and I do tend to lead wide receiver. However, because I'm always in kind of like a win now mode, I'm hoping that I'm always a running back away. So I'd love to have Breece Hall.
Brandon, you picked Treylon Burks. What were your thought process on picking him at number 4?
Yeah, I think Burks has the most upside in this class, the position. Ideally, I can get a safer guy. Garrett Wilson's probably the safest guy in terms of, I think, his floor in the NFL. But a guy like Burks has significant upside that a lot of these receivers in this class don't have. So I'm taking that. I think he has all pro Bowl caliber upside actually for him on AGS. So for me, that's a big deal when I'm looking at these guys and where they're landing is a big importance for me with Burks, because I think schematically he's going to be someone that you have to scheme touches early on in his career, put him in the slot, let him get two-way goes and go to work. But I think he has the highest upside in this class, so that's why I'm taking him over a guy like Drake London. I think London's a bit safer, but with receivers, I really want the guy who's going to get closest to potential wide receiver 1 upside, and I think that's Burks at this point.
Okay. Let me ask you two a question now. If you're been in the league maybe a couple of years, do you guys see any kind of trades happening pick wise before a rookie draft like this? Does anything like that ever happen? Have you guys seen that before?
Yeah, I think in my home league a couple of years ago, there was a lot of movement in the first 4 or 5 picks. It really depends on, for me, what the manager's team composition, like what their ideal team composition is like. Like if you want to get, like, I remember a few years ago, one of my good friends, he took Clyde Edwards-Helaire pretty early. He took him actually over, like Trevor Lawrence, and this is Debbie too, actually. So he took him really early thinking, okay, if I can really hit on the actual draft that we have of current NFL players, I can set myself up pretty well early on. It actually didn't work out for him. So I think it really depends on what your ideal team comp is. I took CeeDee Lamb pretty early in that draft, I remember, and kind of building the wide receiver core from there. Because I think, Evan, you stated about the longevity with receivers, and that's 100% correct. I think when you're a dynasty league early on, you might want to, take running backs. But I think for me personally, I'd rather have the higher upside receivers, because you're going to get 4, 5, 6+ years out of those guys that you would, looking from them in contrast to the running backs.
So I have to ask, because you brought up Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and this was a question I really wanted to ask you this morning.
Yeah.
So let's paint the scenario that everything goes the exact way it did in that draft. If someone trades up in the back end of the first round and does not take Breece Hall, they take Kenneth Walker, they take Isaiah Spiller, then Breece Hall goes middle of the second round. Is Breece Hall first and foremost? Is he your 101? And then if that situation plays out, does that scare you off him at 101 in a non-superflex draft?
So for me in a non-superflex draft, I'm always trying to take the guy. If I'm at 101, the guy I either have the most confidence in being an immediate producer, and that's a big deal for me, or the guy who has just the highest upside in totality in one QB. In Superflex, I'm going for the highest upside quarterback.
Obviously,
right? That's going to be in this class, obviously Malik Willis. But that's kind of my thought process with Hall and how that would work. But it's interesting because where they're drafted for running backs is important because of perceived volume.
Yeah,
that's a big one. Walking into Pittsburgh last year with Naji Harris, everybody knew this is room that's his early on. So we can kind of understand that he's going to get 250, 275 plus touches from day one with all the receiving workload that he can handle. So that's a big deal. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where Breece Hall lands. Buffalo's a spot, I think, in the first round that makes a lot of sense for them. I know they want to take some tread off of Josh Allen in the red zone. That's a big deal. So
I'm glad that you guys brought up the quarterback situation. Now we have 2 quarterbacks that are off the board already. Malik Willis is already off, and now Matt Corral has been drafted as well. Are you guys a little hesitant about the quarterback class going into this draft? Because I would say it's maybe less than a handful of QB prospects that are really okay. They might go in the first round, probably second or third day. Would you have taken Malik in the second round of fantasy draft, or would you have maybe waited a couple more rounds to pick him up?
For me, it would be all about it's all about my current roster composition.
Okay.
If I'm in a team where, especially so Kevin took him with the 3rd pick.
Yep.
If you go based on traditional settings, that would mean Kevin is a team that probably struggled last year unless they trade. But again, this is all hypotheticals we're making up to make this draft interesting. In that situation, he probably does need a quarterback. So even in a single QB league, Willis with that rushing upside, that's a nice pick. And then hopefully you're leaning on a guy like, I guess maybe Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, something where you can lean on a player who's a top 15, top 20. They're not all being hoarded somewhere. And then you get to see what you have from Willis and maybe don't have to throw him in right away. But it's all about what I currently have on my roster, because I play in one single QB league, but I have Dak Prescott. So in that situation, I wouldn't touch Willis. I would load up on wide receivers and running backs at that point.
Okay.
So
yeah, no, I agree. For me, I think it's interesting because a guy like Willis has the highest rushing upside of a quarterback that we've seen since Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal when we're talking about 1 QB leagues, is you want the quarterback with that safety net of a floor, especially if you're only in 2-point per interception leagues. Like Malik Willis, I would even take if we're talking like 111, 112. If I can get 700 rushing yards and 8 to 12 rushing touchdowns annually from Malik Willis when he starts, I'm 100% taking that. And that's a great safety net and a really good ceiling. Like we saw like Jalen Hurts, who struggled as a passer in Philadelphia last year, but he provided you with QB3 in points per game. Yeah. Like he's a guy that I think that, fantasy wise, like Malik Willis can be very similar to. I think Malik Willis has a little bit more upside as a pure passer in the NFL. But I think a guy like that, I mean, if you can get a guy in, QB3 to QB5 in points per game whenever he steps out, it's not a bad thing.
Okay. I'm going to put you guys on the spot right now. We're going to do some real-time draft questions. We're going to go, right. I'm going to give you one question. I'm going to say, give me some draft steals this year going into the draft. Give me some draft steals.
Okay. Draft steals. Pierre Strong Jr., number 1.
Yes.
I think I have him graded as my running back 3 right now in AGS. So I'm really high on him. I think he has a really interesting skill set, especially in a wide zone scheme. Miami's my favorite landing spot for him. Another one at running back is Keante Ingram out of USC. I loved his tape going all the way back to Texas. I think he has a really dynamic profile as a mover, especially when we're talking about a guy who's going to get probably day 3 capital. There's some really good backs in this class, like James Cook, etc. Those guys will probably go earlier than a guy like Ingram, but I think Ingram has 3-down upside in this class. And then at receiver, I think my first one is David Bell. Like we're not talking about David Bell. Analytically, he's one of the best guys in this class. Because
been hearing a lot of chatter about him the early, about this weekend and then early today. I've been hearing a lot of chatter about him.
Right. No, I think as you should, because I think a guy like that who was so productive, we're just kind of digging him because he doesn't fit the physical mold of what we like in a receiver. But neither did Allen Robinson, neither did, a lot of these guys that are in the league right now that are pretty dominant players and productive. So I think he's one, and Kyle Phillips is the second one at UCLA, slot receiver. I think he could have a similar career to that of Cole Beasley, Hunter Renfrow type of player, really good punt returner, and should see the field early. And that's the one thing I like with my later round picks are guys who are going to see the field in some capacity, in some facet. So a guy like Phillips, I think, is going to step in and be, punt return 1 on an NFL special teams unit, and then from there he can grow into a role. So those are kind of my sleepers. And then I think at tight end, to toss one in, Jelani Woods.
Yes.
Okay.
I think just the upside there of having a guy that big, that athletic. I think an NFL team's going to find a role for him on day 2 of the draft for sure.
Ryan, I'm going to go to you. I'm going to get you a different question.
Oh, okay.
I want an off the wall, bold prediction for this year's draft.
All right. I actually have one because I think I said this last week, but I'm going to
Okay.
throw a weird one at you. I'm not a big draft guy. That's why we bring smarter. I'm not a big college football guy. That's why we bring smarter people like Angelo on the show. Kevin Coleman is in the chat right now. We have him on the show. But I like to follow trends, and I like to pay attention to what people are saying about players. And there's a player in this draft that is everything they're saying about this guy is basically the same thing they were saying about a guy last year. So I'm not going to say he's my favorite quarterback. I'm not going to say he's going to be the overall best quarterback of the draft. But if the landing spot lands right, everything people are saying about Carson Strong was the stuff they were saying about Davis Mills last year. And Davis Mills was the #1 rookie fantasy quarterback last year. When you look at like 300-yard games, touchdowns, things like that.
I'm a little mad Tampa Bay didn't draft him. I wish they would.
I wouldn't be surprised if Carson Strong ends up in a situation where he is able to play right away. They're saying the right things, most pro-ready quarterback things along those lines, where everybody else has some things they need to work on. Carson Strong needs to work on not having broken legs. And so I won't be surprised if Carson Strong has the best rookie year of every quarterback in this draft. Now, he is not my favorite. Desmond Ridder is by far my favorite, but I won't be shocked if Carson Strong has the best rookie year a la Davis Mills last year.
Okay. All right. Here we go. I'm going to do over under. The line right now for quarterbacks taken in the first round is 3.5. Are we going over under for that?
I think over, and I think 4.
Wow.
I think what ends up happening is we see Willis and Pickett go off first. And then I think Ridder, I think the buzz about him is real. I think we see him as the 3rd QB off the board. Then that's where it gets interesting because I think you're going to see either one of Corral or you're going to see Howell in the first round. I think that has a real possibility of happening.
And when I did my mock yesterday, that was where I struggled. Right now, I'm not sure who's going to trade out of the back end of the draft because I have it at 3 right now. I have it as Willis, Pickett, Ridder. I completely agree. Corral or Howell would be the one someone trades up for. I just don't know who. Like the most common one that I would see trading out would be Cincinnati. Everybody else who's kind of at the back there, especially with Detroit ending up with the 32nd pick, they kind of need people that they need to take. Cincinnati, unless a great corner falls, I don't know that there's somebody there at the back end of the first round who Cincinnati needs. The ability to trade out might be the better ability for the Cincinnati Bengals at that point.
No, yeah,
so
I agree.
I 100% agree. If it's going to happen, Joel, you grab my guy. I was hoping to finish him up there. But anyway, I think that could be the situation where it could be Howell or Corral. I just don't see them going earlier than the first 25 picks. So
okay, we're wrapping up the last round of the rookie draft. I'm going to do a buy or sell for you guys. Now,
Okay.
The last really 2 players that could be traded would be Deebo Samuel and also Baker Mayfield. Are you buying or selling either one of these guys or both getting traded at the draft on draft night?
Buy. I think one of the 2 gets traded. I think the more likely one is actually Deebo. I think the smoke with the Jets, I think might be real too. So that's interesting. Baker is going to be, I don't know if a team wants Baker to start. And
I don't think Cleveland's even wanting to give him away because they have to have an insurance policy just in case of what happens with Watson. Because
they're gonna have to draft a quarterback. I think at least in the 3rd round, or trade for a quarterback like a backup, like a Gardner Minshew type player.
Don't you get my hopes up like that.
that could help them out, in the meantime. But I don't know, man. I don't know what team would want Baker Mayfield to start. Is the Seahawks? I think if you're the Seahawks, you kind of want to see what you get in Drew Lock. I wouldn't wheel Baker out over Drew Lock. You know who Baker Mayfield is.
Yep.
I think at this point in his career. But yeah, I don't know, man. That's interesting. Deebo, I think Deebo gets moved. I think the Jets are the one that's in play.
Ryan, what do you think? I mean, we kind of talked about a little bit before the show. What's your thoughts on who could be traded or whatnot, buying or selling?
So I will say, I want to start by saying I do think Baker Mayfield will be traded. I know the Browns may not want to trade him, but I don't think they're going to have a choice in this. He is becoming a distraction already out here doing interviews. It's just not a good look. And I understand they can't depend on Deshaun Watson in year one, but they've already got Jacoby Brissett. They already went out and got the Dobbs kid from Pittsburgh. So they're building their insurance plan. And one thing that they're doing is they're building their insurance plan around quarterbacks who can install a similar game plan as Deshaun Watson. So they can run the game plan and then just hopefully plug and play Deshaun Watson when the time comes. I don't think Baker gets traded on day one. I think if he's getting traded, it's going to be on Friday. And I think it'll probably be during round 3 because everybody's going to wait and see what fell to them in the draft or what they had to give up at that point. And so I think what you're going to end up seeing is I do think Baker gets traded before, I would say, the following Monday. I think the deal happens. But I completely agree. I think the Deebo Samuel thing, I think there's fire where this smoke is, and I do think he's the most likely to be traded. I don't think it's a coincidence that you have a very San Francisco-esque front office, or not really front office, but coaching staff in the Jets, and they're the teams that's making the most noise to get him because they know what he can do and the system they want to run. I don't think San Francisco wants to trade him, but if the Jets start offering one of these early first-round picks, how do you say no when you have a guy who just doesn't want to play for you? And part of the reason you're in the situation you are with Deebo right now is because you didn't take him in the first round. So he doesn't have first-round money. He doesn't have that fifth-year option. He's mad about his contract already. Now you can go get a younger player and kind of undo the mistakes you made with Deebo. And I'm not saying Deebo was a mistake. Deebo was very clearly not a mistake. But it's an unfortunate situation. I don't know that we've ever seen such a diva year of trade me if you're not going to give me what I want in the NFL.
It's all wide receivers too that just want the wide receiver money that Adams and Hill have gotten too. So
yep. And it would have been interesting if Miami hadn't traded for Tyreek Hill. How hard would Miami have been in on this Deebo deal? Because you know Mike McDaniel wants Deebo. But I guess the real question is if it's true that Deebo doesn't want to play this running back hybrid role, do these San Francisco offenses want him because they want to use him how they were successful using him, and that's not how he wants to be used. So.
Let me ask you before we go and look at the board about, because this week we're not doing any winners or losers this week because it is a rookie draft that's not needed. We're going to go over.
We all won. We did a rookie draft with Angelo.
Before we pull up the board again, I wanted to ask you guys now, if he does get traded to the Jets and he doesn't want to be that hybrid running back wide receiver combination, what does that hurt his value going into, fantasy wise? Because I mean, he's going to the Jets led by Zach Wilson under center. Really, is that really going to hurt his value going into this year's fantasy?
I think it does because they're just a less productive offense and less consistent offense. I think part of the big appeal with Deebo Samuel was they got in the red zone a ton,
right? Yep,
and they were able to capitalize on Deebo's skill set in the red zone. That's not going to happen as often in New York. They have some problems up front. Obviously, Zach Wilson's a young quarterback now in year 2. They have some good weapons there with Moore and then Davis on the outside. But, putting in Deebo would obviously make them a lot more prolific. But I don't know how consistent that offense is going to be with the problems up front and, young quarterback. And obviously and a not as good a run game. That's a huge one too, is, with San Francisco, you had arguably the best run game in the whole league schematically. The Jets have nowhere near that. So that's
don't hate on Michael Carter like that. Come on, Brandon.
I do like Michael Carter though.
Don't hate on Michael Carter like that.
I do like Michael Carter, but yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit different. It's like Tyreek Hill too. I think you definitely downgrade Tyreek Hill, right? Like you're going from Patrick Mahomes to Tua.
Right. I
think Tua is a good quarterback, but you go from one of the best passing offenses in the NFL to one that we have giant questions about.
Okay. I'm just going to take it from another angle. I don't think not using him as a running back would affect him as badly as if San Francisco ends up just holding on to him. I completely agree. If he ends up on the Jets, it's not great. If he gets used primarily as a wide receiver, I work with Jason Wood over at Football Guys, and I don't know if he ended up tweeting this out, but he dropped it in our group chat. where he did the splits of weeks 1 through 8 and weeks 9 through 17 of Debo. And it's pretty even split of how he was not being used as a running back and how he was being used as a running back. The fantasy points broke down to a 0.1, 1/10 of a difference per game average on when they were using him like a wide receiver versus when they were using him as a running back. It's insane fantasy points wise. And that comes down to something I was actually just talking with Justin from 14 Personnel this morning. Targets are so much more valuable than carries. And so while we love seeing Debo touch the ball 800 times, what you get on the yards per catch, not to mention the PPR points of the reception, I don't think if San Francisco can make amends and only use him as a wide receiver, this is not going to be bad for him in fantasy. So don't freak out if they're like, we're never using him at running back again. Don't immediately trade your Debo shares away.
Especially if New York goes, okay, we're going to pay you this much money, you better try and be a running back.
Yeah, and that's the worry, and that's like I brought up is what if they want to use him the same way, and then we just have disgruntled Debo who's still. I mean, I imagine if the trade happens, he's getting a new contract.
Listen, we're paying you $20 million a year. You better be a running back for a few games. That's all I gotta say. No, all right, Ryan, if you want to bring up the board.
Yeah, the one last thing I want to throw out about Debo, and I do love Michael Carter, and we all kind of seem to have fond feelings for Michael Carter. It was a necessity thing in San Francisco last year. Jeff Wilson was constantly hurt. JaMychal Hasty was the starting running back for a week. At one point, I think Kyle Juszczyk was their number one running back for an entire week. And so there's a lot that.
So they had Elijah Mitchell. They had the guy that was throwing popcorn at people, bringing in there to being a running back. They had so many running backs last year. It was just,
all right, crazy. So let me see if I can figure out which one is just my screen share. I think I click this and then say make it full screen. There we go.
So I'll ask you both. Are there any picks that really stood out to you guys the most in these 5 rounds of this rookie draft?
Let me go. Let me take a look. I think the one that sticks out to me the most is Justin Ross at 2-1 by Faith.
Yes.
That's one of those that you kind of like because the upside of Ross is that of a potential first-round player in the NFL draft. So for me, that's the one that sticks out because, in the second round, you're at pick 13 essentially. You want to kind of take your swings around there. You're not going to get uber safe in the second round of your rookie draft, especially in 12 team. So taking your swing at Ross, I totally respect it and think that he can be a pretty darn good player if the medicals check out. I think he has probably the widest variance, widest range there in terms of when he can be drafted. He can be drafted anywhere from the 2nd to the 6th round, potentially undrafted, which is wild, right? So that'll be interesting to see. That one definitely stuck out to me.
The one that jumped off immediately to me, not because I don't love it, I absolutely love it, was Skye Moore going at the 109 ahead of David Bell, George Pickens, and Jahan Dotson. Just because Pickens and Dotson are being flirted with as first-round picks, and Skye Moore isn't quite there yet. So I'm happy to see there are people who believe in Skye Moore. We had Matt Waldman on our Wednesday show a few weeks ago, and one of the great things Matt brought up about Skye Moore was – obviously, with the 40 time, he's being looked at as a burner, but some of the underneath routes he runs are the best part of his game. And if you're telling me that one of the fastest guys in the draft is also better at running underneath routes, I love hearing things like that. But it's just interesting. And again, this is pre-landing spot. This is pre-draft capital. But to take a gamble on making sure I get Skye Moore again in a linear draft, knowing you're not picking again until the 21st pick of the draft, I want to walk out of this with Skye Moore versus a guy like Jahan Dotson or George Pickens, who could end up being back in the first round picks and inherently have more trade value, if you will. But if you're looking to build your team, you want Skye Moore on your team. It was a ballsy pick, and I don't mind it whatsoever.
Are there any picks that are maybe reaches or picks that are kind of iffy on this draft board?
Take a look.
I'm starting to get torn on Wandel Robinson, and maybe you can talk about him a little bit, Angelo. Yeah. I don't like the height. He's 5'8". He's little. I just don't know that. So seeing him go in the third round, but early third round, but it's also a 12-team draft. So he was the 26th pick. I'd be more comfortable with a guy like Ross in the third round and a guy like Robinson in the 4th round if I were making those picks. So I'm not going to call them reaches because, like Angelo just said, Ross could end up being Faith's best pick if he's got the clean bill of health. arguably could be one of the best wide receivers in this draft. Robinson worries me because I'm getting very gadget guy feelings, a la, and I know this is a horrible comp, but it's just the comp from last year, Tutu Atwell. Like, it's just a little guy, and I just don't know how it's going to work out.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think, a guy like Robinson's kind of like Lindbaum Jr., same school too, right? So
yeah,
I think that's the interesting part is, can he have an NFL role? I think he can. I think he's a talented kid, but is it one significant enough to have fantasy upside is the real question, I think. And so I agree with that one. I think another one, looking at the board, I would have taken Brian Robinson over Zamir White, Kyron Williams, and Damian Pierce. I think Brian Robinson has upside to be a significant fantasy producer in the right system. I think Philadelphia is one that comes to mind of a team that needs a running back like him. So I think that's one. I think he's going too low in drafts, and I've seen that early, mid-third round. I think he's a mid-second rounder in rookie drafts, especially in one QB.
Awesome. All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us for the draft this morning. It was a quick one, only 5 rounds, which is.
I say these rookie drafts are always a breeze. So
before we get you out of here, Angelo, anything you'd like to plug before we get you on out?
No, but thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. Yeah, not too much to plug. Just have my normal my profiles on angelanalysis.com. Got all that stuff coming out soon in terms of the Ascension draft guide, and got the grading system up and running. So have some new stuff on the horizon. It's going to be pretty fun. So I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, thank you guys again for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for coming on to us. And well, guys, this has been another edition of Mock It Like It's Hot. We will be back next week with a kind of a different set of draftees. We have a regular Joe joining me and Ryan on the show. Her name is Caitlin Ramersma. She is just a regular Joe that plays fantasy football, has won 2 fantasy championships in the last 3 years. She'll be joining us for just a good old-fashioned redraft mock for next week on next Monday. Make sure to go to Club Fantasy FFL for a new article from one of the newest writers, Steve Lawson. Steve's going to give you 3 running backs primed to bounce back in 2022. And, of course, it is draft week. It's a big week for Club Fantasy. Besides the shows today, we will be having a huge show on Wednesday with 7 guests. Not 1, not 2, not 3, 7 guests as we mock out the entire first round of the NFL draft. And then on Thursday, we continue the annual draft tradition of live streaming the first round. This year, we join forces with the IDP guys and new guests every hour upon the hour as we take you to pick 32 of the first round. Packed week for everybody.
It's that first week of Christmas for fantasy football players.
So. Yep, 100%.
So get your NFL gear on. It is going to be draft week all week. Just make sure to tune into Club Fantasy FFL. Make sure to follow us on all the social media platforms. We will be back next week at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. For myself and Ryan, peace. Class
Have a good day.